Welcome back to Inclusion Revolution, and Tim Vassallo and myself talking about a very unique program known as Redi Set Go, and that Redi is spelled R-E-D-I. I've been corrected. Now, Tim, we got through the first week around journaling and self-discovery, and you being a writer, it must be very rewarding as well, being able to bring that writing essence out of people, so that in itself must be very rewarding. But tell me what that leads to. In other words, week 2 of your 3-week program, Redi Set Go.
Well, the Redi, as we said, we talked about the journaling and self-confidence building, etc. The set week is what we'd call the heavy lifting. This is where the hard work comes in, which is why we lead into it with building people up, because we're going to deal with some pretty difficult issues. The second week, the set week, is we deal with disclosure. That's the disclosure and accommodations, which are two very, they're considered buzzwords in the industry. However, they're not buzzwords. They're very important issues that we have to talk about. So what we talk about first, we do a little bit of disability awareness training. We have an expert come in, give us a little overview of, the different disabilities that are out there. Obviously, you can't do them all, but we just talk about some key things, any questions people have. We then move on to researching our own disability. If there is a person who perhaps lives with chronic pain, we get them to investigate that. And it's not just simply looking on Wikipedia as what does chronic pain mean, but doing research, looking at different maybe scholarly papers that have been written by universities, etc. We then move to disclosure. Disclosure is a word that's used a lot, and really what, in this situation, disclosure means disclosure of your disability.
To an employer or somebody, potentially, yeah.
Perhaps even when you're attending university or college or training. You go in, you have to know how to do it, you have to know when to do it, and really a very important question is whether you should do it or not.
All right, well, I'm going to grab you on that, because that's a big question that I'm sure many of our viewers are interested in hearing about. First of all, just to paraphrase, just to make sure I got it all, so at the beginning of the second week, the first thing is you want to research your disability and understand how it affects you. I've always been a little careful around clinical titles because I have lots of clinical names, but I have found the research for me has been very important to identify what's me, rather than just the term ADHD, which can mean so many things. Which things are really TOVA?
Exactly.
And so I assume that that's sort of what's happening at the beginning. Do you find, and I have found this, but I'm curious if you find, a lot of people have very little information on their own disability. Have you seen that, or are you finding a pretty good self-awareness around that issue?
I believe it's a little bit of both, but I have noticed quite a few people that perhaps if it's a long-standing disability that was diagnosed, say in their adolescence, they've been bearing that almost, that it's a stigma. And really, they don't want to focus on it. For example, ADHD, they know the negative implications of ADHD. They live with them. So to read them again, it basically say, oh yeah, I recognize that, I recognize that. It doesn't necessarily make them feel any better. That's because they're not doing it within the focus of a program such as this, where we allow them to investigate the disability, the different treatments, etc. But to actually focus on it for a change and not just to go, yeah, I've got that. Right,
so to look into that more personally and what it means, and identifying their own symptoms and challenges and being able to overcome them, because it's certainly a gap that I've seen, and that's why I was so excited about your program. It's a gap that I have seen across the board, and that gap is self-awareness of people with disabilities about what their disability is, and of course, most importantly, what they require through accommodation to equalize the playing field.
Exactly.
And I know that's sort of, if we get into the research, we can move to the next part, which is that identification of what do I need. For instance, Tim, if someone did the research and they had a physical disability like a back issue and they wanted to work in an office, what would be the process they might go through in week 2 to kind of discover the steps that you might take them through right up to that point of disclosure, if you don't mind?
Sure. Well, that is part of it. They do not only just investigate their own disability, but the accommodations that are available. So they find, a lot of them, it's their first time seeing, what's available. So using your analogy of a person with say with a degenerative back problem, they would look online, they would see what's available, the different chairs, the different setups, maybe an ergonomic desk. And then there are agencies within HRM, such as Teamwork Cooperative, where where, you know, you would go to them, you would speak to them about this issue. They would find out how they would find this accommodation. Perhaps it's an ergonomic chair. How to find the funding for that, how to get that chair. That way, when you go for your interview and you do disclose your degenerative back issue, which you don't necessarily have to specifically label it, but you say that you have a physical disability that you necessitate an accommodation, which is a chair. However,
you're not handing them a bill for $6,000 in order to employ you. You've already got that worked out.
You're giving them a solution as opposed to a problem. So you're coming in and saying, yes, this is my concern, this is my accommodation. I can bring this myself to the table through connection with people like teamwork.
Yeah.
And really, my only accommodation is that nobody sits in my chair, or that this is my chair and that everybody understands why I need this chair, and it's not to be shared amongst everybody on the staff.
And it's not a special accommodation. No. It is equalizing the playing field so I can do the work just like anybody else.
You can imagine if you were in an office setting and you needed to be seated for 8 hours a day and you had a degenerative back problem, having an ergonomic chair that allows you to do that is really only evening and equaling the playing field.
Sometimes it's as simple as being able to stand up every hour or so and take a little stretch, and if the employer knows that.
Right.
So let's get to the meat, which is how do you explain it? Because let's say we've done this wonderful success of you've identified your disability, you understand it, you see there's some really important accommodation, for instance an ergonomic chair, you've spoken to the powers that be about supporting you towards employment and getting those things, and I know that's really important to me because I believe if we walk into an employer and we need to disclose, and in my belief if it affects the job at all, I believe disclosure is important, and I know you and I have talked about this, but assuming that the disclosure is necessary, I think it's really, really important that we've got our ducks in a row, which is what Redi Set Go really does, in that we understand what we need, we understand our disability, and we also understand when and if it does or will affect us in, for instance, a mainstream work environment. Right. So do they know all this, but how do you get comfortable talking about it?
Well, we do, one of the really useful techniques is we do a script. We do a disclosure script. Just like anything else, it could be from, you know, anything that somebody might have difficulty saying. Perhaps, you know, rehearsal for a play. You have to rehearse before you go in and get the lines right. So if you have your disclosure script in place, we practice it, we do it on video, so we do mock interviews, so the person knows whether they're putting their hand to their face or looking away when they're, you know, talking about important issues. That could, you know, make it uncomfortable. So that person does that script. So when they go into the interview, just like you or I or anybody going for a job interview, you want to lead with your best foot. You want to go in and blow them away with what you can do, not what you can't do.
So in other words, you also address the when to bring it up, the how to bring it up, and of course by doing that advanced work you've already built confidence and you've done some mock interviewing or practicing, as you mentioned, that really allows you. Now before we go to week 3, which is go, always exciting to hear the word go in a Redi Set part, and I guess what I want to ask you is at this point, where do you see the client right now? It's the end of week 2. How are we feeling? Because that's a tough week. You mentioned that.
Well, I mean, a few people have used the analogy of the Oreo cookie. You know, you have you know, sandwiching two things, a difficult thing between, you know, the two issues. So, you know, the middle week is the difficult week. It's the heavy lifting, like I said. So, really, you know, we have to monitor it. I do check-ins. Rather than make people have to say they're having a bad day, I check in with each person every day and find out where they are, how they feel.
Are you still journaling?
Yeah,
I guess I should ask that. That journaling keeps going?
The full 3 weeks is journaling all the way through. This week I find the journaling is more personal. I give them less assignments and more just personal journaling so they can express what's going on, because maybe it's the first time they've ever had to deal with it, because a lot of people do not disclose their disabilities.
Understood. So before we come back and talk about Go, which is a really exciting piece of the program and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back on Inclusion Revolution here on Eastlink TV with Tim Vassallo. Hope you'll join us.